Borders are supposed to be simple. A line on a map, a checkpoint on the road, a marker saying this country ends here and the next begins there. But in reality, borders can get weird, really weird. Some divide entire towns, others cut right through homes, and a few create places so bizarre they almost feel like mistakes. Today, we're counting down the world's strangest borders, and trust me, by the end, you'll never look at a map the same way again. But before we begin, please remember to hit that like button if you found this video interesting, subscribe to Should I Go for more cool videos like this one, and hit the notification bell so you always stay up to date with the latest releases. Okay, now that's over, so let's begin with our first crazy border situation. We start our journey in Washington State, or at least a part of it. Point Roberts looks like a classic American coastal town, with quiet neighborhoods, fishing boats bobbing offshore, and kids riding bikes down leafy streets. But here's the catch. You can't drive there from the rest of the United States without going through Canada. This little community of about 1,000 residents sits just below the 49th parallel, the line drawn across a map in the 1800s to separate the US from Canada. The line was straight and tidy, but geography isn't always tidy. Point Roberts got sliced off, left dangling below the line like a loose button on a shirt. For the people who live here, that border isn't just a line on a map. It's part of their everyday routine. Imagine having to cross 2 international borders just to buy groceries, go to a doctor's appointment, or even watch a movie in a bigger town. For kids, it's even stranger. The local elementary school goes up to 3rd grade, but after that, students ride a school bus through Canada, check in at border control, and re-enter the US mainland for middle and high school. It's a commute unlike anywhere else in America. Point Roberts also has some unique quirks. Packages shipped to the town often get delayed or rerouted, since, honestly, most carriers don't really know how to handle a US address that's surrounded by Canada. Gas and milk are often cheaper here than across the border, so Canadians sometimes make a trip down just to fill up or stock their fridge. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the US-Canada border was closed, Point Roberts was almost completely cut off from the world, relying on ferries and special exemptions just to keep supplies moving. So yes, Point Roberts is America, but with a Canadian detour built right into daily life. For residents, it's just normal. For everyone else, it feels like stepping into a geographical riddle that somehow became home. At number 9, we travel to one of the harshest borders on Earth, the peak of Mount Everest. Rising 29,032 feet into the sky, Everest is not just the tallest mountain in the world, it's also an international dividing line. The border between Nepal and China runs right across its summit, splitting the roof of the world in two. Climb Everest from the Nepalese side, and you'll celebrate in Nepal. Climb from Tibet, and your flag will wave in China. It's a strange thought, 2 climbers standing shoulder to shoulder at the top of the world, but technically in different countries. Even the base camps reflect this split. On Nepal's side, base camp is bustling, almost like a small city of tents, climbers, and Sherpas preparing loads of gear. The atmosphere is colorful and alive, with tea houses, yaks hauling supplies, and trails buzzing with trekkers. On the Tibetan side, the landscape feels stark and remote, with stricter regulations, fewer crowds, and a harsher environment. It's quieter, colder, and more controlled, reflecting the different cultures and governments that meet at the peak. This border is also a source of tension. Nepal and China both regulate climbing permits differently, and each side has strict rules for expeditions. Rescue operations, environmental policies, even the collection of trash and bodies from the mountain are handled separately, creating unique challenges at the world's highest altitude. And yet, for all the politics, the summit itself is shared. Climbers from both sides often find themselves huddled together at the very top, oxygen masks hissing, flags snapping in the wind, gazing out over the Himalayas. In that moment, the borderline seems irrelevant, but officially, it's still there. Everest reminds us that no matter how high you climb, borders follow. Even at the roof of the world, lines on a map stretch all the way to the sky. Next, we visit a border defined not by politics, but by sheer natural power. Iguazu Falls, on the boundary of Argentina and Brazil, is one of the largest and most spectacular waterfall systems in the world. Spread across nearly 300 individual cascades, the falls roar over cliffs and crash into the river below with such force that you can hear them long before you see them. The border between Argentina and Brazil runs right through this thundering wonder. On the Brazilian side, visitors stroll along elevated walkways that give sweeping panoramic views of the entire system. From there, Iguazu looks endless, like a wall of water stretching to the horizon. Cross into Argentina, and the experience changes completely. Catwalks bring you right up to the edge of the falls, where water thunders past your feet and mist soaks your clothes. Here you can peer into the Devil's Throat, a U-shaped chasm where torrents of water plunge more than 260 feet in a single, breathtaking drop. And then there's Paraguay, just a few miles upriver. While it doesn't claim a direct piece of the falls, the three countries meet nearby at a single landmark, where you can stand at a lookout and see all three nations at once. Few places on Earth allow you to take in such raw natural beauty while also straddling multiple borders. Iguazu isn't just a tourist attraction. For centuries, it's been a sacred place for indigenous peoples, a vital ecosystem for wildlife, and a symbol of the power that nature holds over human-made lines. Argentina and Brazil both proudly showcase the falls, each offering their own experience, sweeping vistas on one side, raw intensity on the other. In a world where borders often divide, Iguazu Falls unites. It's not just one of the world's strangest borders, it's one of the most awe-inspiring, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful dividing lines aren't drawn by humans at all, but carved by nature itself. In Vermont, USA, and Quebec, Canada, the border isn't just a checkpoint on the road. It runs through daily life, and nowhere is that more visible, or honestly more charming, than in the towns of Derbyline and Stansted. Here, the international line slices right through streets, gardens, and even houses. Families once found themselves with kitchens in Canada and bedrooms in the United States. But the most famous building of all is the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, a cultural landmark deliberately constructed to straddle the border. Step through the front door on the American side, and you'll find yourself wandering into a library where the reading room is in Canada. The children's section? That's in the United States. The circulation desk? That's in Canada. And if you attend a performance upstairs in the Opera House, you may be watching the show in one country while sitting in another. For decades, locals treated the border casually. Friends visited neighbors across the street without thinking about passports. Kids darted across invisible lines to return library books. But as border security tightened in the 21st century, things got trickier. Today, most people must officially check in at border crossings, even if they're just walking a few steps into town. Still, the spirit of cross-border living remains. Derbyline and Stansted remind us that borders can be more than walls. Sometimes, they're simply lines on the floor. And in places like this, they can bring two communities together instead of keeping them apart. Not all strange borders are lighthearted. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, is one of the most dangerous and heavily fortified places on Earth. Stretching 160 miles across the Korean peninsula, this 4-kilometer-wide strip is a reminder that the Korean War never truly ended. On both sides, barbed wire fences, landmines, and heavily armed soldiers maintain an uneasy peace. Watchtowers dot the landscape, and villages near the DMZ live under constant surveillance. But in the very center, something remarkable exists: the Joint Security Area, where blue conference huts literally straddle the border. Inside these huts, a single table runs across the dividing line. Sit at one end and you're in South Korea. Slide your chair a few feet and you're in North Korea. Tourists on the southern side can even walk briefly into the north, under the watchful eyes of guards, of course. The DMZ is strange not just for its tension, but for its unintended side effect. Because no one lives in most of the zone, it has become a haven for wildlife. Endangered cranes, wild boars, and even rare tigers have been spotted in the lush forests and rivers. It's an accidental nature preserve, created by conflict. For visitors, the DMZ is chilling and unforgettable. You stand in a place where history froze decades ago, where every step is symbolic, and where a border isn't just a line, but the front line of two very different worlds. In the middle of the Bering Strait, just 2.5 miles apart, lie the Diomede Islands, two rocky outposts separated by both politics and time. On one side is Little Diomede, a tiny Alaskan village of around 80 people. On the other is Big Diomede, part of Russia, uninhabited except for a military base. What makes them extraordinary isn't just geography, it's the international date line that runs between them. Stand on Little Diomede in the United States and you can look across the water to Russia, where it's already tomorrow. The islands are nicknamed Yesterday Island and Tomorrow Island. In the dead of winter, the sun rises on Big Diomede almost a full day ahead of its neighbor. For locals on Little Diomede, life is tough but deeply connected to tradition. Supplies arrive by helicopter, and hunting is still a way of survival. Children attend one of the most remote schools in America, staring across the ice at a land they'll never visit. During the Cold War, families with relatives on both islands were separated by politics, able to see one another from shore, but forbidden to cross. The distance between the islands is short, but it represents a divide in nations, ideologies, and even in time itself. In few other places on Earth can you stand in the present and gaze directly at the future, just across an icy stretch of water. Most borders spark disputes, with countries fighting over even the smallest scraps of land. But between Egypt and Sudan lies a triangle of desert that nobody wants, Bir Tawil. The reason comes down to a quirk in mapmaking. When colonial powers drew borders in the 19th century, they accidentally created two conflicting boundary lines. One gives Egypt the Halaib Triangle, a valuable stretch of land by the Red Sea. The other gives Sudan the same territory. Both countries claim Halaib, which means neither wants Bir Tawil, the barren land left behind on the opposite side of the line. Bir Tawil is about 800 square miles of pure desert. There are no cities, no rivers, no resources, nothing but sand and heat. It's one of the only pieces of land on Earth not officially claimed by any nation. That's made it a magnet for eccentric adventurers and would-be monarchs. Over the years, people have planted flags, declared new kingdoms, and even issued passports for their imagined micronations. None of them are recognized, of course, but the dream of ruling your own desert kingdom is honestly hard to resist. In reality, Birtual is empty. No permanent settlements, no water supply, no economy. It's just a blank patch of earth left behind by borders drawn with straight lines instead of, well, common sense. In a world where land disputes can last centuries, Birtual stands out as the place nobody wants, a silent, sun-baked reminder of how odd borders can be. Before 2015, the border between India and Bangladesh was one of the strangest in the world, a puzzle of enclaves and counter-enclaves that made daily life unbelievably complicated. There were more than 160 of these little pockets of land scattered inside each other, like Russian nesting dolls. Picture it, a piece of India completely surrounded by Bangladesh. And inside that, another tiny patch of Bangladesh surrounded by India. Some enclaves were barely larger than a single field, while others were only the size of a few houses. For the people living there, it was, honestly, a bureaucratic nightmare. Residents often had no access to basic services like schools, hospitals, or police because technically they were citizens of one country, but completely surrounded by another. To visit government offices, they had to cross international borders, sometimes illegally, since border guards weren't stationed to accommodate such bizarre geography. Many people lived without electricity, sanitation, or legal protection. If a crime was committed in one of these enclaves, local authorities couldn't even intervene without creating an international incident. Some enclaves had existed since the 18th century, leftovers from treaties and land swaps between feudal kingdoms. Generations grew up in these twilight zones of nationality, belonging everywhere and nowhere at the same time. In 2015, India and Bangladesh finally agreed on a historic land swap to simplify the map. Over 50,000 residents were given a choice: keep their old nationality and move, or stay and adopt a new one. For many, it was the first time they had clarity about which country they actually belonged to. For decades, though, life in Cooch Behar was a reminder that borders aren't always straight lines. Sometimes, they're not so tangled that the people trapped inside spend their lives trying to unravel them. In the small European town of Barla, the idea of a simple border doesn't exist. Instead, this single town is split into dozens of Belgian and Dutch enclaves, creating one of the most complex borders anywhere on Earth. Walk down a single street here, and you might cross the border 5 or 6 times without realizing it. The dividing lines are marked on the ground, painted across sidewalks, and even through buildings. Step inside a cafe, and you could be sipping your coffee in Belgium, while your friend at the next table is technically in the Netherlands. Local businesses have learned to adapt in creative ways. Some shops move their front doors just a few feet so that their official entrance, and therefore their address, is in the country with more favorable tax laws. Restaurants playfully advertise the novelty of having one dining room in Belgium and another in the Netherlands. At night, border markers glow under the streetlights, turning the town into a living map where geography and daily life blur together. But this isn't just a tourist gimmick. For residents, the border affects everything from mail delivery to emergency services. If a fire breaks out in a house split by the border, which fire department shows up? In Barle, agreements have been forged over the years to make sure life can function smoothly despite the chaos. The town has become a symbol of how borders can be complicated, but also surprisingly cooperative. Instead of dividing people, the enclaves of Barla have created a culture of cross-border living, where identity is flexible and humor helps smooth the edges of bureaucracy. It's a reminder that borders don't always keep people apart. Sometimes, they weave communities together in the quirkiest ways imaginable. And finally, we arrive at the strangest border of them all, a single home that straddles two nations. In Barla, some families literally live with one foot in Belgium and the other in the Netherlands. Imagine cooking dinner in a kitchen that's legally in the Netherlands, then carrying your plate a few steps to the dining room, which happens to be in Belgium. At night, you tuck into bed across an international line. Your address, and even your nationality, depends on something as simple as which side your front door faces. Over the years, some homeowners have physically moved their doors just a few feet so they could switch countries on paper, without ever leaving their property. For children growing up here, the border is part of everyday play. One moment they're coloring in the living room in Belgium, the next they're racing through a hallway in the Netherlands. For adults, it can get more complicated. Taxes, utilities, voting rights, all of these depend on which side of the line you live on, even if it's only a matter of inches. Tourists flock to these split homes to snap photos of border markers running through kitchens and living rooms, but for the people who actually live there, it's just life. They adapt, they laugh about it, and they continue to prove that borders can be both absurd and strangely beautiful. It sounds like a joke, a house cut in half by international law. But here, it's reality. Dinner in one country, sleep in another. It doesn't get stranger than that. From towns split in half, to islands divided by time, to no man's lands that belong to nobody, borders are more than just lines on a map. They're stories of history, politics, and the everyday lives of people who navigate them. So which one of these blew your mind the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this countdown, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more curious explorations of our world. Thanks for watching. And next time you cross a border, remember, the strangest ones are still out there, waiting for you to discover them.